The untold story of Eddie Clark, the most feared inmate in the U.S. behind the cold, iron bars of America's most notorious prisons. Stories of violence, rivalry, and survival often become larger than life. Among these is the legend of Eddie Clark, a name that struck fear into the hearts of both inmates and guards alike. The story of his final confrontation with Reggie has gone down in prison lore as one of the most intense, brutal, and mythic battles ever to occur behind the walls of a maximum security facility. It's a tale that reveals the darkness of the prison system, the complexities of human survival, and the untold consequences of a life built on violence. The rise of Eddie Clark didn't come from a world that could have prepared him for the violence and corruption of prison life. Born into a working-class family in the industrial heart of Detroit, Eddie was a quiet, reserved child. By all accounts, he wasn't a troublemaker as a kid. But that all changed during his teenage years. A combination of bad influences, a broken home, and a desire for power led him into the world of crime. Eddie was a natural at street-level criminal activities. He moved from petty thefts to armed robberies with frightening speed. His ability to read people, his fearlessness, and his talent for violence turned him into a respected figure in the city's underground world. But it wasn't until Eddie crossed the line into a gang-related murder that his fate would take a dark turn, one that would lead him to prison and change the trajectory of his life forever. At just 22, Eddie was sentenced to life in prison for the brutal murder of a rival gang member. The crime sent shockwaves through Detroit's criminal world, marking Eddie as a figure not to be underestimated. But the life sentence, which most would have viewed as a death sentence in itself, was only the beginning for Eddie Clark. The prison years, rising to infamy. Prison has a way of turning men into something else entirely. Eddie, still young, found himself in a brutal, unforgiving system where survival meant adapting, or dying. He quickly realized that the rules of the street applied even more in prison, but now the stakes were higher. Here, in the confines of maximum security walls, every action could cost you your life. In the early years, Eddie kept his head low, observing the power dynamics within the prison. He understood that in a place where violence reigned, the strongest ruled. He began to earn a reputation as a silent predator, someone you didn't mess with, not because he spoke loud, but because he was loud in the way he acted. Eddie was an enigma. He rarely spoke to other inmates, but when he did, his words were sharp and direct. He commanded respect through his fearsome presence and willingness to settle things with violence at the slightest provocation. Soon, he climbed the prison hierarchy. He became known as the most feared inmate in the system, an unrelenting force of nature that would not be deterred by anything. He controlled a faction within the prison, not with alliances, but through sheer intimidation. Guards feared him, and inmates dreaded crossing him. As Eddie's power grew, so did the rumors surrounding him. They said he was untouchable, that no man could defeat him. His reputation stretched beyond the walls of the prison into the outside world, making Eddie Clark a legend, a mythic figure. Reggie, the challenger. Enter Reggie. A newcomer to the prison system, Reggie was a force in his own right. At first glance, he didn't seem like much. Small in stature, with a wiry frame, Reggie lacked the imposing size of many other inmates. But what he lacked in size, he made up for in skill and cunning. Unlike Eddie, Reggie had a knack for strategy, a mind sharp enough to maneuver through the roughest of environments. He quickly built a network of loyal followers, some say even aligning with factions that would normally be enemies of Eddie's. The clash between Eddie and Reggie was inevitable. Both were vying for control of the same territory within the prison, and both had the same goal: dominance. Reggie's rise through the ranks was meteoric, and his ability to navigate the prison's volatile politics made him a natural rival to Eddie. There were whispers in the halls, and even among the guards, that Reggie would be the one to bring Eddie down. But Eddie, as he had done with so many before, didn't take Reggie seriously at first. He dismissed him as a small player in a big game, someone who would either submit to his authority or disappear quietly. But as time went on, Eddie began to notice that Reggie wasn't intimidated by him. Unlike the others, Reggie didn't flinch when Eddie's shadow loomed over him. The first confrontation was subtle, a few words exchanged in passing, a cold stare, but it marked the beginning of a feud that would shake the prison to its core. The showdown, the battle for dominance. The events leading up to the final showdown between Eddie and Reggie began with small altercations. A stolen pack of cigarettes here, a slight against one of Eddie's men there, but these were mere sparks. The tension between the two men reached a boiling point when Reggie's followers sabotaged one of Eddie's major smuggling operations inside the prison. Eddie's retribution was swift and brutal. He struck back by attacking one of Reggie's closest lieutenants in the prison yard. Reggie responded by orchestrating a hit on one of Eddie's men during a routine prison work detail. The battle lines were drawn, and it was clear that there would be no backing down. Finally, the confrontation that everyone had been waiting for came to a head in the prison's common area. It was a seemingly ordinary day. Guards were distracted, inmates moved about the yard, but both Eddie and Reggie knew that this was the moment. They had spent months building up to this final encounter. It was to be a fight for control, for dominance, and for survival. The standoff began with a single, charged moment. Eddie stood across from Reggie, their eyes locked. The noise of the prison faded into the background. Eddie, towering over Reggie by a good 6 inches, took the first step forward, his fists clenched, ready for the violence that would come. Reggie, his face expressionless, didn't flinch. The air was thick with the tension of 1,000 unspoken words. It happened in an instant. Eddie threw the first punch, a wild, powerful swing that sent a shockwave of energy through the yard. But Reggie was faster. With a quick sidestep, he avoided the blow, and in the same motion, he jabbed a sharp uppercut into Eddie's gut. The hit was a clean shot, and Eddie staggered back, momentarily winded. The crowd of inmates surrounding the fight roared, sensing the shift in power. Eddie, enraged, came at Reggie with everything he had. He swung wildly, his fists like hammers, but Reggie danced around him, using his agility to stay one step ahead. Each blow that Eddie landed only seemed to make Reggie angrier, but more determined. Eddie, for the first time in his life, found himself outmatched, not in strength, but in speed and strategy. The battle raged on, a brutal exchange of fists, kicks, and desperate moves. Blood splattered across the yard, and for a moment, it seemed like neither man would give in. But as the fight wore on, it became clear that Eddie's age and size were starting to work against him. He was slower now, more tired than he had been in his younger years. Reggie, on the other hand, moved with the fluidity of someone who had spent his entire life learning how to survive. In the final moments of the fight, Eddie made one last desperate charge, but it was Reggie who saw the opening. With lightning speed, he sidestepped Eddie's attack and drove a knee into Eddie's chest, knocking the wind out of him. As Eddie collapsed to the ground, gasping for air, Reggie stood over him, his fists still clenched. It was over. The aftermath, the end of an era. In the aftermath of their confrontation, Eddie was rushed to the prison infirmary, his body battered and broken. Reggie, too, was injured, though his wounds were not as severe. The fight had taken its toll on both men, but it was clear that Reggie Cole had emerged victorious. Eddie Clark, once the most feared inmate in the system, was no longer the dominant force he had been. The battle, however, didn't just change Eddie's status within the prison, it shook the very foundation of the prison's power structure. For the first time in years, inmates began to look to Reggie Cole as the new figurehead, the new leader. Eddie, having lost both his physical prowess and his reputation, was relegated to a shadow of his former self. Though Eddie Clark would remain in prison for the rest of his life, his legend was over. And Reggie Cole, once an unknown player in the game, was now the one everyone feared. Must subscribe my channel for more video. Thanks.